Hello, buenos dias, good morning, and welcome to the filler episode of the Egotistical Podcast. I call it that because what I had in mind for this episode has grown exponentially in the meantime. My original thought was to just talk about AI because I've always found computers fascinating. 100 years ago, we barely had any use for electricity beyond lights, motors, phones, and radio. And now we have machines that, if they don't really think as we understand the term, they can definitely process and consolidate information into coherent responses that mimic human thinking. Getting to the bedrock why when trying to figure out how things work has always fascinated me. I'm an electrician, for those who don't know. Electricity basically works the same as water flowing through hoses. It's just that it's a stream of electrons that move so fast that they can kill you, start fires, etc. But the principle is the same. So, how did we go from a flow of electrons to pocket calculators? Much less supercomputers that fit inside of our pockets, and artificial intelligence. I started researching, and as I was distilling the information, I was also listening to the Fire Sign Theater album, Everything You Know Is Wrong. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do something like this? Write a few educational sketches, do a few silly voices. And as the sketches and monologues grew, I decided, well, why don't I contact a few friends who have thrown me an acting role here and there and spread the love? So that's what it's grown into, something somewhat educational and hopefully somewhat entertaining, with touches of the Fire Sign Theater, Stan Freberg, and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So, stay tuned for that. Here's something funny I noticed about AI. Have you ever tried to use the voice mode of ChatGPT? In Toastmasters, there are things we call filler words that we try to avoid. And so on. But the voice version of ChatGPT throws them in there to make it sound like it's thinking and human. It's a little bit insulting, actually. It's like when I used to call AT&T to put money into my cell phone account years ago, and the speak and spell voice would say, "Let me look up your account for you," followed by the clacking of keys as if I was supposed to suddenly believe that I was talking to a real human who was looking something up on their computer. It's such a wacky world we live in. Anyway, in the meantime, here is the filler episode. Just a bunch of various thoughts I've jotted down over the ages. Probably some politics too, we'll see how it goes. I mean, there's just so much wackiness going on in our country, it's impossible not to talk about it. But let's start with Halloween, since that will be next week. Halloween is a time characterized by hayrides, costumes, candy, and of course, scary movies and scary stories. There were a few things that frightened me as a child. I remember my older cousin Stefan telling me the story of Carrie back in the 70s, especially the part where Vinnie Barbarino and Nancy Allen pour pig's blood all over her. I lay awake in bed that night, wondering what exactly was so horrible about pig's blood. Was it like acid? Would it burn your face off? Would it perhaps permanently stain your face to look like blood? Even Sesame Street could be scary at times. My older sister was scared by Oscar's doll, which made a bizarre, wheezing whine. I was scared when they went to Puerto Rico, and Oscar climbed inside of an oven for some reason, and then went flying out, screaming in pain. But there are two top contenders for things that traumatized my poor, innocent little soul. The first was a 1970s Halloween special titled The Devil and Daniel Mouse. This was a version of the Faust story animated for kids, complete with folk music. It was Nelvana's trial run for their feature film Rock and Rule, which is sort of a PG version of heavy metal, but I digress. At the end, the devil, cheated out of his contracted soul, screams in rage while his contorted face spins and bursts into flame. This sent 6-year-old me running downstairs in terror and hiding under a dust cover. The younger generations really take the internet for granted. For decades, I tried to describe this cartoon to other people who had no recollection of it whatsoever. Finally, in the early 2000s, when YouTube came on the scene, my searches brought forth fruit. Now, of course, I can watch it and laugh, but I can also see why little kindergartner me was so terrified. But the most horrifying thing of all was the ending of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm sure everyone has seen it and knows the scene I'm talking about. If you don't, fast forward if you don't want to hear some spoiler. But when the Nazis open the Ark of the Covenant, their faces literally melt off. This is pretty intense for a PG movie. And I'm sure if anyone besides Lucas and Spielberg had done it, they would have gotten an R rating, as PG-13 didn't exist yet. Kids today probably would say that it's cheesy and fake, but 8-year-old me watching somebody's eyeballs running down the front of their face as their bloody skin blistered and peeled on the big screen found this horrifying. Keep in mind, young whippersnappers, this was a gigantic 1980s movie screen, and not the multiplex widescreen TVs that they have today. This scene pretty much burned out all my horror circuits, and nothing ever terrified me again. Halloween costumes are always much easier when you're a kid, especially if you have a mother who wants to show off her crafting skills. My cute little sainted mother had just been transplanted from Brooklyn to Basking Ridge, New Jersey. All the other Pleasant Valley Sunday suburban moms might have dominated at the country club tennis courts, but none of them could hold a candle to my mom when it came to making their children Halloween outfits. Ever notice how the way they always portray 80s nostalgia in movies is to show kids in plastic Star Wars, E.T., or Ghostbusters masks? That is accurate, but my mother didn't go for any of that crap. One year, my sister and I were owls. My mother spent a month painstakingly cutting out feathers from brown paper grocery bags. Remember those? And then drawing details on them in colorful magic marker. She then glued them to garbage bags with face holes, turning us into adorable little strychnine trick-or-treating fire hazards. Another year, my sisters and I were the cast of The Wizard of Oz. My older sister was Dorothy, my little sister was the Cowardly Lion, and I was Nick Chopper, alias the Tin Woodsman, in a suit of armor crafted from blue poster board. Suffice to say, this outfit lasted about 3 houses or 2 Hershey's Kisses and a peanut butter cup before catastrophically falling to pieces. But my mother's crowning achievement was the table. A piece of masonite with a head hole cut out, covered by an old tablecloth with plastic dishware, cups, and napkins glued to the top. A jack-o'-lantern centerpiece mask covered my head so I could walk around. This magnum opus wasn't for trick-or-treating. It was for the Cub Scouts and the yearly firehouse competition, in which she, won first prize. This was her ultimate masterpiece. She retired from costume making after that, and we were on our own. Suffice to say, the following year there were at least 5 kids dressed as tables around town. One year we were papier-mâché Muppets. I had a Fozzie mask, and my sister was Miss Piggy. A few years later, I repurposed her Miss Piggy head to be Cubert. That was big back in the 80s. So, all the other kids from Status Symbol Land can keep their Billie Jean King wannabe tennis moms. I'll take my sainted queen of the arts and crafts costume trend-setting mother any day. In other news, I was crawling along the Belt Parkway the other day. Seriously, crawling along at 5 miles an hour. Usually it's not that bad in the mornings, so I figured an accident might have happened. An accident did happen, but it was on the other side of the divider. Why does everybody have to slow down and be a looky-loo whenever there's an accident? It's not like you're going to get out, jump the divider, and perform CPR or set any fractures or perform surgery or do anything useful. I have to drive to work because I currently work at a poop processing plant. I mean a wastewater treatment facility in Coney Island. It's not far as the crow flies, but it takes me about 20 minutes to drive there and an hour and a half to drive back to my domicile. That's the problem with public transportation in New York City. All the subways work to service Manhattan. It's like a spider with its legs spindling out into the other boroughs. There are buses that would take me from my apartment to Coney Island, but it would take about 2.5 hours each way. I've worked at poop processing plants before. I worked at one before for about 3 years. It's wonderful inhaling fecally scented air every day. It either has given me super immunity, or one day I'm just going to burst apart at the seams and a bunch of bugs are going to come scurrying out. I work with a great bunch of guys, though. That really is what makes or breaks a job, especially in construction. If everyone is fun, friendly, and helpful, it makes the day go by. I get to play with lots of teeny tiny control wires. Controls are my specialty. The only thing annoying about the job is the commute, especially the parking. There's one side of the street with no parking restrictions, and the other side that we're not supposed to park on. Now, the side without parking restrictions actually does have some restrictions. You're not supposed to park there from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. But of course, all these trucking companies in Brooklyn just like to dump their tractor trailers there overnight, and nothing ever happens to them. They don't get ticketed, they don't get towed, so they wind up taking up most of the good parking spaces every day. I believe in hating the game and not hating the player, but I also wish an eternity of dropped calls and bad Wi-Fi connections upon their souls. Maybe a little bit of incontinence as well. Okay, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's throw in a little bit of politics, because great googly moogly, there is so much going on. Here's a fun fact. 98% of the fentanyl that comes into the United States comes through Mexico. Venezuela has nothing to do with it. At what point are we as a nation of conscience? Remember we were supposed to be the good guys? At what point, if ever, are we going to say, hey, maybe our Navy just should not be blowing up Venezuelan boats and murdering people without providing any proof of wrongdoing whatsoever? Remember, this is the party that calls itself pro-life. And now, we're building up an even larger military presence in Latin America. You know, the word fascist has just become like the word woke. It just causes people to give themselves an excuse to close their ears and refuse to listen to a word you say. But I really don't know what else to call what is happening right now. Authoritarianism? Basically, anything you criticize Trump and his ilk for these days is seen as some sort of personal attack not only on him, but on everyone who voted for him. All right, what else went on since last we spoke? The Republican Party politicians that had absolutely no problem with Trump orchestrating a violent riot because he lost a fair and legal election threw a tantrum at people dressed up in frog suits peacefully dancing around in the streets. Yes, the No Kings protests that swept across America. What really cracks me up is when Fox News and OAN, etc. say, Trump won. He's the people's choice. The people have spoken. So you better shut up. But when the people spoke back in 2020 and did not want Trump, what did he do? He incited violence. He organized a riot. That was his answer to the people's choice, to the people speaking, to the people voting. Violence, rioting, people screaming to kill police officers with their own guns, people smashing their way into your Capitol building. So yeah, that's my response when people tell me that I should be quiet because he's the people's choice. I'm sorry, but that's something I will just never be able to wrap my head around. How a president can orchestrate violence because he lost an election, but half the nation still thought, hey, this is the brilliant, good, upstanding Christian values president I want to run our great nation with liberty and justice for all. Yes, they all have the right to vote, and that's not for me to say, and no, they didn't have to vote for Kamala Harris instead, but even understanding the mechanics of us versus them ideology that we've talked about before, how he ever became the Republican nominee again after that shameful and unforgivable day is beyond me. And the reason it's so hard to wrap my head around is because so many of these Trump supporters are good, decent, caring, and loving people. You know, I asked on Facebook, I asked, what is it about Trump? Like, what is it that you want to see? And not to argue with people, but I really want to understand. For those who support Trump, what is your vision of America? What is it you want America to be? What is it that you want to see? What kind of future do you want? And what has he ever done in his personal and private life that makes you think he's ever going to give it to you? And obviously, I don't like him, and I do respect people's choices, and I do just really want to understand. Because there's no governing going on. There's just pathetic zingers and insults. There's our screeching, harpy Attorney General Pam Bondi telling investigative committees that she doesn't have to answer their questions, which is not true, by the way. And Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt answering legitimate questions from journalists with infantile wisecracks like, "Your mom," that probably weren't even funny when she said them back in middle school. Our government has shut down because the Republicans would rather die 1,000 deaths than let barely affordable health care remain barely affordable for most Americans. And I hate to break it to the rest of you, but yeah, if support for Obamacare goes down, then your private rates are going to go up as well. Private insurance uses any excuse they can to raise rates, so you're going to be hurt by this as well. Our government is ridiculously broken. You know, there are two things that perfectly sum up the state of affairs in this country today. The first is Trump destroying 44% of the White House. Remember he promised that it would barely be touched? No, the entire East Wing, 44% of the White House is destroyed. While the politicians that crow that they're the ones who love America cheer him on. The other thing is an AI video that Trump himself posted of him taking a gigantic poop on Americans. Again, being cheered on, the irony of it completely lost on his followers. As I said, these things just perfectly sum up the state of our country. This is where we are at. I don't know. I guess I'm the problem. Like I've said before, maybe I'm just hateful for not worshipping Trump, as a few of my former friends have said. I suppose I need to cultivate my inner beauty. I see beauty product commercials all the time. Use this shampoo, use that facial cream, do some detailing on your features with this eyeliner or that lipstick. But a commercial for inner beauty? What would that look like? You'd have two doctors washing up after an operation. One would say to the other, "Hey, Fred, great gastro bypass on that supermodel." And the other would say,
"Yeah, but she was so ugly on the inside."
"Yeah." And then the announcer would say, "Folks, has this ever happened to you? Why not take Inner Gleam, fortified with special ingredient Chromium X? Each tablet electroplates your inner organs for that special inner beauty shine." Then you would have two female doctors, and one would say to the other, "Wow, did you check out Quasimodo there on the operating table? Did he get hit by the ugly stick or what?" And the other one would say, "Yeah, Grace, but boy, did he have inner beauty." And the first one would say, "Absolutely, and that's all that counts." Shame he died of chromium poisoning, though. And on that note, that is it. Just a shorty this week with a small dose of political ranting. Thank you so much for listening to this, the filler episode of the Egotistical Podcast. Like I said, I'm planning an educational, surrealistic humor audio drama about AI for a future episode. So if anyone is interested in participating, please contact me at egotistpodcast, one word, @gmail.com. For more information, please visit egotisticalproductions.com. As always, I have lasagna. Until then, as Billy Joel used to say at the end of his concerts, take care of yourselves and make sure you also take care of somebody else.